What's a newscast without talk of the fiscal cliff? After he was reelected, President Obama had one pledge to his supporters to get out of Washington more often. In a conference call to donors, the president said that he would be crossing the country, working with supporters to find ways to avoid that so-called fiscal cliff. There's even a survey on BarackObama.com asking supporters how they think they can help the president in his second term. Joining me now, CNN contributor and Democratic strategist Maria Cardona and Republican strategist Ron Bonjean. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning,
Good
Carol.
morning.
So if you can't come to some sort of agreement with Republicans, then cross the country and have voters do it for you. Is that sort of it, Maria?
I think there's something to that, Carol, and I think that it could be a very powerful tool. I mean, let's not forget that the people that our leaders, our elected leaders, especially in Washington, listen to the most are their own constituents, their own voters in their districts. So if there are Obama supporters in the districts of the Republican congressmen that President Obama needs to convince in order to come to a balanced solution to the fiscal cliff, I think igniting and motivating and mobilizing his millions of supporters across the country is a pretty smart way of doing it.
Will it work, Ron?
Well, you know, it's always a good idea for the president any president to be talking to voters. The question here is, who should he be talking to? And right now we don't have a deal yet in Washington. We're talking about the real, very broad parameters of a framework. So the question is, what would he say beyond what he's said before? I think more time needs to be spent in Washington talking to lawmakers, especially members of his own, especially Democrats. I mean, they're not exactly signing up for entitlement reform right now. There are plenty of news articles all over the place talking about the fact that they are not signed up for Social Security and Medicare reform just yet, and that's going to be a significant part of any deal.
Well, Maria, I seem to remember in Obama's last term, he often said, hey, it's up to you to get things done, meaning it's up to you voters to get things done. That didn't go over so well in his first term because Republicans simply said, hey, Mr. President, you're the leader here.
Well, I think that this time is a little bit different. There's no question that President Obama needs to take leadership here, and I think that all of our leaders can walk and chew gum at the same time. He can have those very important conversations with the leadership here, the Republican leadership here, and I agree with Ron, he needs to continue to do that. But he can also mobilize his own supporters and voters across the country to make sure that he is able to meet the mandate that came out of this election. And what mandate was that? To make sure that he comes to a balanced solution with Republican leaders, let's remember, on whatever fiscal cliff deal that we come up with. I mean, let's not forget that the majority of Americans agree with the vision of this president that the wealthy should pay a little bit more and that middle-class tax cuts should continue to be extended.
Okay,
and
well,
it's
I want to
the GOP
pose that
has
to
a brand
Ron
problem.
because there was an article in the New York Times this morning, and it said some Republicans are even caving in, as far as the Grover Norquist pledge to never raise taxes ever, 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 as long as they live, so help me God. And the article said that some Republicans are kind of willing to talk about that now and throw the pledge by the wayside.
Well, you know what, I don't subscribe to that theory until you actually see some type of fine print on the table. You know, Republicans, Speaker Boehner has stepped forward and offered a reasonable solution of raising revenue and entitlement reform as a way of preventing the fiscal cliff. And I think, and we've heard the president now saying that he's willing to come down a little bit on the rates. So right now we're in this interesting dance where we're all talking about how we'd like to have a compromise and what we're for. But what's going to be interesting is when we get into the fine print, how that's going to fall away and how the partisan lines will likely start to harden. And I think that's why the president will likely go onto the campaign trail to try to jostle loose, some Republicans, but also some members of his own caucus who aren't going to move either.
Well, we'll find out in the next couple of weeks. Maria Cardona, Ron Bonjean, thanks so much for the interesting conversation this morning.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.